You're looking at a photograph of a place you've never been. Maybe it's a small village somewhere you can barely name on a map. Maybe it's a frame from a movie. Maybe it's a song from an era you weren't even born into. And suddenly you feel something. Something that's hard to put into words. A kind of homesickness, but in reverse. Like you're missing a place you've never been to. Like something inside you remembers a life you never lived. And the strangest part isn't the feeling itself. The strangest part is that it feels exactly like real homesickness. Just as intense, just as physical, just as disorienting. Most people who feel this don't know how to explain it. Some think they're just weird. Others assume they spend too much time daydreaming. And many keep it to themselves because they can't find the words. But psychologists have been studying this phenomenon for decades, and what they've found says something profound about how certain minds work. Because this isn't fantasy, and it isn't confusion. It's something far more complex than that, and far more interesting. The first thing that stands out is that this feeling isn't new. It exists across almost every culture in the world, and each one gave it its own name. The Welsh have a word, hiraeth. There's no direct translation into English. It describes a longing for a home you can't return to, or one that may never have existed. A mixture of nostalgia, melancholy, and an ache for something you can't quite name. What's striking is that the Welsh don't consider hiraeth a disorder. They consider it part of the soul. The Portuguese have saudade, that bittersweet sadness for something absent that may never return. And that can also be felt for things that never existed at all. The Germans have Fernweh, which translates literally as distance ache, the opposite of homesickness, not wanting to go back home, but aching to reach somewhere you haven't seen yet, or that maybe never will exist. And in 2012, a writer named John Koenig started an unusual project called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, a dictionary of emotions that don't have names yet. He coined the word anemoia, nostalgia for a time you've never lived, the feeling of melancholy when you look at photographs of people who died before you were born, the strange emotion of hearing music from the 1940s and feeling connected to something you never knew, the quiet grief of seeing an old city in black and white and thinking, I would have belonged there. That so many cultures across so many different languages felt the need to create words for this says something important. This isn't a quirk of a few unusual people. It's a recognized human experience, studied, named, and in many traditions, deeply valued. But the question psychologists started asking is this: why do some people feel this with an intensity that shakes them, while others never feel it at all? To understand it, you first need to understand something about how memory works in the human brain. When you remember something you actually lived through, your brain activates a network called the default mode network. It's the network that switches on when your mind isn't focused on any external task, when it wanders, when it dreams. This network isn't resting when you zone out. It's doing something very specific, simulating experiences, reviewing the past, imagining the future, and constructing scenarios that never happened. Researcher Arnaud Dargembeau from the University of Liège spent years studying how the brain builds what he called mental episodes, fragments of experience that can be real memories or completely imagined ones. And he found something surprising. For the brain, the difference between a memory of something you lived through and a detailed simulation of something that never happened is much smaller than we think. If someone imagines a place, an era, a life with enough intensity and detail, the brain can generate an emotional response that's nearly indistinguishable from what it would produce for a real memory. And then that person feels homesick for something that never occurred. This isn't fantasy. This isn't confusion. It's the human brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, but with an uncommon level of power. The next question is obvious. Why do some brains do this so much more intensely than others? This is where the research gets especially interesting. In the 1990s, psychiatrist Ernest Hartmann developed a concept he called boundary thickness of the personality. He spent decades studying why some people experience the world with so much more intensity than others, and he found a fundamental difference. There are people with thick boundaries and people with thin boundaries. People with thick boundaries separate their emotions from others' emotions well. They sleep soundly. They're not easily affected by the atmosphere of a room. They maintain a clear separation between imagination and reality. People with thin boundaries are the opposite. They're highly empathic. Other people's moods affect them deeply, even without words. They have vivid dreams, sometimes hard to distinguish from waking life. They absorb the atmosphere of places like they're wearing it. And, most relevant to our topic, they have the ability to mentally inhabit experiences they've never lived. Hartmann found that people with thin boundaries are especially prone to feeling that strange longing for places they've never known. Not because they're confused, but because their brain crosses easily between what's imagined and what's felt. This connects to another important concept, absorption, described by researcher Auke Tellegen. People with high absorption can immerse themselves so deeply in an imaginary experience that they feel it as real. A film can make them cry as though it were their own life. A book can leave them with a genuine emptiness when it ends. And a place they saw in a photograph can make them feel like they miss it. Researcher Elaine Aron, known for her work on highly sensitive persons, found similar patterns. Highly sensitive people don't just process external stimuli more deeply. They also process with more depth the stimuli that come from within. The imagined ones, the dreamed ones, the ones with no date and no real address. If you're someone who feels this, probably none of these descriptions surprise you. You've probably felt this way your whole life. And maybe at some point someone told you that you were too sensitive, that you daydreamed too much, that you lived in another world. What the science says is something different. And here we reach the most important part of all. Because this capacity, this ache for places that don't exist, doesn't always come from the same inner place. In some cases, it's exactly what it looks like, the signature of an extraordinarily imaginative and sensitive mind, a rare ability, a gift. But in other cases, psychology reveals something deeper, something more personal. Psychologist John Bowlby, known for his attachment theory, described something he called the secure base. The idea is simple. Every human being needs, from childhood, a place where they feel completely safe, an emotional home, a place where the world stops being threatening, where you can simply exist without having to justify yourself. When that secure base was present from early on, the person grows up with an inner sense that there is a place where they belong. But when that base wasn't available, whether through instability, through absence, through emotional disconnection, the mind does something very curious. It starts looking for it somewhere else. Researchers Mario Mikulincer and Philip Shaver studied how people with anxious attachment respond to images of safety and home. And they found that these people tend to generate idealized representations of what that safety would feel like, precisely because they never experienced it in a stable way. In other words, some people are not missing a geographic place. They're missing a feeling, an inner state, a version of themselves that finally feels at home. And that place they long for, that village from a film, that landscape from a past era, that city that appeared in a dream, is not the real destination of the longing. It's a symbol of something deeper, a representation of a peace they haven't yet found. And this isn't weakness. It's the mind doing the best it can with what it has, searching in the most creative way possible for something that at some point wasn't there. If you're someone who feels that longing for places you've never seen, there's one question worth asking yourself with complete honesty. What does that place have in your imagination that you don't yet have in your real life? Because when you explore that answer carefully, what tends to appear isn't geography. It's stillness. It's belonging. It's the permission to be exactly who you are without having to explain yourself. And that changes the question entirely. It's no longer, why do I miss a place that doesn't exist? It becomes, what part of me is searching for that feeling? You don't have to find the place. Sometimes just recognizing the need is enough. There's something remarkable about people who feel this. They tend to be people who see the world in more layers than most, who feel music in a way they can't describe, who cry for the stories of people they've never met. Who can imagine entire lives in the 10 seconds it takes to look at a photograph? That's not a flaw. It's a way of processing existence that most people never experience. And if it hurts sometimes, if that longing feels too heavy to explain, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your mind works at a depth that not everyone understands. You're not lost. You're searching. And maybe the most valuable thing isn't finding the place. Maybe it's understanding that you already carry inside you what that place represents. If you've ever felt this kind of homesickness for somewhere that doesn't exist, leave a comment. There are far more people who feel exactly the same way. And for many of them, simply having a name for it was enough to feel something like arriving, at last, somewhere that felt like home. If you want to keep exploring this kind of psychology, subscribe. The next video might explain something about you that you didn't know you needed to understand yet.